One question I get over and over again is, how can I get better at DevOps? And so I've teamed up with a group of awesome DevOps experts and content creators. And in this video, we're gonna go through some of the things you need to think about when starting your DevOps career, or even if you're already doing DevOps. And we are also going through some of the mistakes we've made when starting out, so you don't have to make the same mistake in your DevOps journey. Hi everybody, welcome back to CoderDave, where we talk about DevOps, especially with GitHub and Azure DevOps. Let's jump straight into the first two mistakes we've made and we see people making all the time and how to avoid them. And for these ones, we have Sid.
Hello, my name is Sid, but I go by DevOps Directive here on YouTube. I'm a software engineer focused primarily on DevOps and cloud infrastructure. I work with startups to help them apply DevOps principles as they scale their business and applications. I've made plenty of mistakes throughout my career, but Dave didn't want this video to be an hour long, so I'll focus on just two. The first mistake is using infrastructure as code to deploy cloud resources, but then modifying those resources manually after deployed. For example, when an application starts needing more CPU or memory than it is provisioned in the VM they're running on, it's very tempting to simply go in and make that change within the cloud console or maybe via the command line. This will fix the immediate issue, but then the deployed resources no longer match your infrastructure as code configuration. This inaccuracy is particularly dangerous because if you reapply the IAC config, it will revert the changes and break things. The key to overcoming this mistake is to embrace the concept of infrastructure as code fully. Enforce that all code changes must go through your version control system and be applied with whatever tool you're using for infrastructure as code. Regularly testing your configurations to ensure that they're in working order, and making sure that your continuous integration process is fast so that when you do need to make a change, you can do so quickly. The second mistake is to assume that the default settings for projects and software are a reasonable choice. Software projects often have to balance between the trade-offs of making the initial onboarding experience easy and simple or making them secure. If you make the default settings production ready, the initial developer experience will likely be extremely frustrating. But if you make the settings too lax, developers will get started easily, but may mistakenly deploy an insecure configuration to production, putting user data and company resources at risk. A great example of this can be found with two of the most popular database systems. If you run the official MongoDB Docker image with no arguments, it will set up the database with no password. It does issue a warning when you connect, but otherwise is perfectly happy. If you try to do the same with the PostgreSQL image, it errors out and tells you to specify a password. Always read the documentation to understand what the default configuration is so that you can make an informed decision about any settings that need to be changed. That's it for me. Hopefully hearing about my mistakes will help you from making the same mistakes throughout your career. Cheers!
Thanks, Sid. That was really interesting. In fact, I've worked in the past with many companies where they had problems just because they didn't change the default settings value or they didn't even know those settings were there to change. And yes, please don't manually change those resources that you've deployed via IAC, because if you do so, the configuration drift and the environment drift problems will haunt you for the rest of your life. Alright, I'm going to set off to Viktor now for other two mistakes he made when he started out in his DevOps career. And it's something you really need to hear.
Hey, my name is Viktor from the DevOps Toolkit channel, working in Upbound, all that jazz. And I'm supposed to tell you about two DevOps mistakes. And the first one is that when I was young, when I was inexperienced, I listened to others. And listening to others is great because they can give you valuable feedback, you can learn from others, but that does not mean that you should always listen and obey the instructions. So here's an example. Me, young. Imagine me very much younger than I am right now, inexperienced, working in a company, and I landed being in charge of 50 applications, give or take, until I started suspecting that not many people might be using the application at the time deploying. And I started asking around, and nobody could give me an answer what those applications are for. But there was very clear directive that if I mess up, I will be in big trouble. So what did I do? I started removing those applications from production. And my theory was that if nobody can tell me who my users are and why they're using those applications and whether they're using those applications, if I remove them from production, somebody will complain, I will be scolded, I will be yelled at, but I will at least know that somebody is using those applications. After a few months, all 50 applications were removed from production. And I got only one incident. Only one of them was used. Only one of them was missed. And 49 applications were just there out of legacy reasons. Nobody knew why they're there. What I'm trying to say here is that you are the expert. You need to make decisions. You cannot blame others for making bad decisions for you. Personally, what I got out of that was being able to work on something more interesting, because I just removed 49 out of 50 applications that were taking my valuable time, or at least I hope it was valuable. Second big mistake I made, again, when I was very young, was not understanding the business model behind the technology that we are working on. So I entered into a project, and the project was in a terrible state. It was taking us half a year or a year to make a single release. Everything was manual, everything was slow, everything was falling apart. There were no real tests, at least not automated. The operations were also copying and pasting from Word documents. And I thought, hey, I'm going to improve things. And I started introducing automated testing. I brought even a framework to facilitate behavior-driven development type of tests. I set up Jenkins, and I did a bunch of things to improve. So after months of work, I created tangible results. We were going faster, we needed less people. There was a certain percentage of the test coverage and so on and so forth. It wasn't perfect, but much better than at the very beginning. And now I think this is a story with happy ending. Did I do everything right? Well, no. I did not understand business. And the business was that my company was selling hours to the end user. And I found it out when I was speaking with the main guy, whatever, some C position. And I was explaining how we did this and we did that. And we are so much better. We are so much faster. And we can do so much more work in much less hours. And he came to me and said, do you know what our business is? I said, I don't know, we sell services to customers and so on and so forth. And he said, no, we sell hours. If you made a system that would allow us to go twice as fast, that means that we as a company are earning half of what we were earning before. That logic is silly. On a long run, that company failed. But the problem in the story is that I did not understand the business model behind that company. And instead of wasting my effort on trying to go against business, I should have left. I left after that conversation, but I should have left at the very beginning and used my time better somewhere else. So understand the business before you start proposing improvements or changes or whatever you want to propose from the technical perspective.
Viktor said something very important. You need to understand the business you operate in and the business model of the company you work for. And this brings me to the first mistake I made that I want to share with you, which is being isolated. When I started playing around in the DevOps field, I thought that I could do it as I was doing it before in my developer career. And we all know that developers are usually not very social people. We like to be by ourselves and work by ourselves. So when I started doing DevOps, I started doing it in the same way. I started doing it by myself, being isolated without talking with other people and other teams about what I was doing, the problem we were facing, and so on and so forth. And this is a big mistake. DevOps is not something you can do by yourself. It's not something even your team can do by itself. You need to connect with other people and teams, understand what they are doing, understand what their pain points are, and what their processes are in the different areas, and trying to bring all of these together. And this comes even before you start looking into tools. As Viktor said before, you can do the most beautiful CI/CD pipeline, accordingly to you, but if it doesn't solve any problem, it doesn't serve any real purpose, or it doesn't fulfill any of the needs of the people and teams around you, then you've just wasted your time. So the lesson is, don't be like me, don't be isolated. Try to bring all the people in the other teams around you together, because that's the only way you can be successful at DevOps. All right, we are halfway through now. Before we move to the next set of mistakes we've made and how to avoid them, hit the like button below if you're enjoying this video or you find it insightful. This will not only help this video to be recommended to more viewers so they can benefit from it, but you can also show your appreciation to me for making these kind of videos, and I would really appreciate that. Thank you. Next in line is Anais, and she will walk you through two very important aspects of DevOps that are often overlooked.
Hello there, my name is Anais. I'm a site reliability engineer at Cevo. Cevo is a cloud computing company that is based on Kubernetes. Now, I just got started in the DevOps space about 11 months ago. Before that, I've never heard about Docker, used it, or used Kubernetes. Then I started a challenge called 100 Days of Kubernetes. I started as developer advocate for a CI/CD platform and then transitioned into SRE at Cevo. Now, here are my top 2 mistakes that I made when I got started in the DevOps space. Number 1, not reading the documentation. I'm sure we've all been there. We wanted to start using a tool and we thought, hey, we're smart, we can figure it out, right? And well, long story short, we ended up confused, irritated what to do, ran into errors, or took twice the amount of time that it would have needed to set up a tool if we would have just read the documentation. Now, I'm not saying all documentation is good and worth reading or spending a lot of time on, but it's good to kind of have an overview to know what is out there, how do other people use it, what kind of is the skill level of the engineers, how are they approaching it, whom are they targeting with the tool. Those are all of information that are useful when getting started with a tool. Now, the documentation can then be complemented with other tutorials, YouTube videos, and other content to make it easier to comprehend and to use the tools in the most effective way possible. So that was my number 1 mistake. My number 2 mistake was not contributing to open source tools from day one. The cloud native space, the DevOps space, and the tech space in general are all benefiting from lots and lots of amazing open source tools and platforms that you can get started with right away. Now, I used a lot of them, especially just to get started, to get familiarized with them, to acquire new skills, and so on. However, I did not really directly contribute to those tools from day one. I didn't quite know how to get started, what those tools need, how I can contribute with my skills, so I wasn't sure how I could actually add value to those tools. However, even if you're just finding a spelling mistake, not really understanding the command, or the command doesn't work on your machine and you use a different command that actually worked, those are all really valuable information that you can contribute to the documentation or you can add to the website. So there are lots and lots of different ways that you can actually contribute to those open source tools. They will help you to acquire new skills, get competence, gain credibility in the space, and just build a network of people who have common interests. So I highly suggest you, if you have any open source tool that you're passionate about, try to find ways to contribute to that project. Now, I hope this was useful. I also have a YouTube channel linked here, up there, and a Twitter account. I hope to see you on my social media as well, and to see you next time in one of these videos. Have a lovely day. Bye bye.
Documentation. Who doesn't love documentation, right? Jokes aside, Anais made a very good point about it. And I have to say, I totally agree with the second point she's made as well. I think, in fact, that contributing to open source will not only help you gain the technical skills, but will also help you thinking more in the bigger picture, how the processes work, how to bring the people together, and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, it will help because you can face in the open source projects the same type of challenges and issues that you may face in your organization when working on your DevOps practices, especially when the open source projects start to grow. Okay, I'm gonna now pass it off to Christian because he has a different perspective and we'll talk about 2 mistakes you really need to hear about.
Hey everyone, this is Christian, and my background might be slightly different as I'm not a software developer. Instead, I'm coming from IT support and the operations side in the cybersecurity field. But I'm also working a lot with DevOps engineers and software developers when helping them integrate security solutions into their own products and services. And I'm personally also getting more and more into the DevOps world, and that's why I love to share my personal experience and my projects on my YouTube channel, The Digital Life. And I can tell you from my own mistakes I did when I started to work with DevOps tools. Because when DevOps is new to you and you're trying to find out how to learn it, you usually find hundreds of different DevOps tools out there, and you might wonder where to start and what you can do with all these tools. But one mistake you should never make is looking at all these tools and solely focus on them, because it's much more important that you understand the underlying concepts and strategies. And this applies to many areas in IT, but especially to DevOps, because there it is very easy to get obsessed with all the different existing tools, and you might just be tempted to find this one amazing DevOps tool that will solve all your problems. But if you haven't really understood the fundamental concepts, so why you'd want to use a specific tool, it's not really helping you. Instead, it's overcomplicating things. So before I could use DevOps tools, I needed to learn more about development processes, the Agile framework, to understand the broader picture of concepts like CI/CD and automation. And I think the same applies to software developers as well, who would need to learn more about cloud infrastructure, servers, or network technologies, for example. So instead of focusing on the tools in the first place, it's better to understand the fundamental concepts, and depending on your background, you should learn where your biggest gap is. And once you understood the concepts, you will get a much better idea of where you can integrate or implement specific tools and where it actually makes sense. So that's why I always say don't focus on the tools, focus on the concepts first, and then you will know which tools will help you and it makes your life much easier. The second mistake I see people sometimes make is using automation tools wrong, because they're trying to automate things that they don't really understand or what they haven't really done manually before. And this can bring you in a very bad position. So don't try to use an automation tool, for example, to set up a Linux server if you don't know how to set up a Linux server yourself. Because when you don't know what these tools are exactly doing, they will actually create more problems for you instead of solving the existing ones you had. So don't try to find new stuff that you could do with automation tools. Instead, look at your day-to-day work and what you're currently doing manually, and then you will find the right tools that could speed up your workflows. You might need to invest a little bit more time in the beginning to optimize your processes, but it will definitely pay off in the end, and you will later have more time when automating your tasks. But if you try to automate things that you don't understand, you can easily end up in a loop of constantly generating new problems without even knowing where to look for or how to fix them. So think about some repetitive tasks that you're doing in your day-to-day work, and maybe you could write a simple automation script to speed up the process or use a specific automation tool that will help you with that. And that's where automation really makes sense and actually saves you more time instead of wasting it.
Christian was spot on. What he said is really true. There are so many people trying to automate things they don't understand. And guess what? It never works. But I want to connect to Christian's first point to tell you about my second mistake I made. He said that you need to learn the basics before focusing on tools. And I want to expand on that because there are so many other things you need to learn on DevOps before even looking at tools. And I've talked about it in this other video, but this mistake is very, very common. A lot of people, in fact, and this includes me when I started with DevOps many years ago, think that DevOps is all about tools, when in reality it's all about people, processes, and then tools. Tools is always the last part. When I started in DevOps, I looked into the tools. I started seeing what source control should I use and what was the best CI/CD tool and what configuration repository to use and so on and so forth. And when I was done compiling what for me was the list of the best tools to use, I quickly realized that the people in the organization didn't want to use those tools or couldn't use those tools because they didn't really fit into the processes that my organization had. What I should have done instead was trying to understand the people working there and the processes that the company had in place. And then started looking into if anything could be optimized in terms of processes or culture, or both even, and do so. And only then, when the culture was right and all the processes were optimized and functional, I should have started looking into the tools. Because remember, you should never have to change your processes to adapt them to your tools, but rather are the tools that should adapt to your processes. This is of course if your processes work well. If not, feel free to change them. Alright, I hope this was valuable to you. We've decided to share the mistakes we've made and how to avoid them, so you don't have to make the same mistakes as we did and you can jumpstart your career. Let me know in the comment section below what you think about this and if you have any question about the topics we've covered. And remember to go and check out the profiles of these other creators and DevOps experts you've seen in this video. You can find all of their information in the description. Finally, you may want to check out this video over here, in which I've teamed up with another group of DevOps experts to share mistakes and how to avoid them. But that's it for me. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. Hit the like button below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I see you in the next video here at CoderDave.